The morning fog still wrapped itself around the fences when I heard the knock. It wasn't the sound of a neighbor asking for sugar, or kids selling cookies. It was sharper, official, like someone trying to claim something that wasn't theirs. When I opened the front door, there it was, a stack of envelopes stamped with the seal I never wanted to see again, the HOA. My farmland, the same land my father's father had plowed with his bare hands, was suddenly marked for something called a Community Garden Enhancement Project. It sounded innocent, until I read the next line: effective immediately, all agricultural production on this parcel falls under HOA authority. I stood there, staring at the paper so long the warm sunlight turned cold. They wanted my tomatoes, my corn, my sunflowers. They wanted the land that paid for my mother's medicines, the land that fed the same neighborhood now trying to claim it. I knew the HOA had been growing bolder, trying to control everything from fence colors to mailbox shapes, but this was a different beast. My land was outside their boundary. It always had been. They knew it too, but power makes people believe they're bigger than the law. The next day, I drove down to the HOA office. I didn't storm in. I walked calmly, holding the deed like a shield. The new HOA president, Linda Carver, greeted me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. She said it was a temporary transition of stewardship for the betterment of the neighborhood. Stewardship. They were talking like I had no right to the soil I'd watered through droughts and storms. I laid out the property map, the signed land survey, the deed. She glanced at it, shrugged, and said, "We'll review and get back to you. But the garden plans will continue." When I got home, I nearly collapsed. My fields, were already crawling with HOA volunteers wearing neon vests. They were hammering signs into the ground, "Future Community Harvest Zone." They pulled up my irrigation lines to install their own hoses. They cut my lock and dragged in wheelbarrows. All I could do was stand at a distance as strangers walked into my land, touching my crops like they owned them. I felt helpless. But then something changed. Something in me hardened like the roots of the oak tree standing near the fence. I remembered what my father used to say while teaching me to sow seeds: a farmer doesn't fight the sky or the rain. But he learns to use both. That night, I didn't sleep. I went through every document, every legal note, every photo of my grandfather holding this same deed. If the HOA wanted a fight, they were about to learn where the real ownership lived, not in paperwork, but in legacy. And that's when the idea hit me, not out of anger, but out of justice: if they wanted my harvest, they would get the harvest. Every last piece. And they would pay for it. By the time the HOA began planting their so-called community crops, my farmland didn't look like a peaceful garden anymore. It looked like a battleground disguised with sunflowers and carrot beds. They didn't understand farming, not really. They came in with Pinterest boards and weekend warrior enthusiasm. They planted crops too close together. Overwatered the tomatoes. Pulled out wild herbs that enriched the soil because they thought they were weeds. They took photos for social media with the caption, "Reclaiming this abandoned land for a greener future." Abandoned. They called my land abandoned. I watched from my porch every day, arms crossed, noting every seed they planted and every mistake they made. They didn't know I kept detailed crop valuation logs. They didn't realize each section of soil had a market value. And they absolutely didn't know I had an agricultural attorney who specialized in land misuse. The volunteers would wave at me sometimes. I didn't wave back. I was already filing documents. Then came the moment that sealed their fate. HOA President Linda stood in the middle of my corn rows, giving a speech to her board. I recorded every word. "This land is ours now. And once the first harvest comes in, we'll sell it at the farmer's market to raise funds for the HOA improvement budget." They weren't just trespassing. They were planning to profit from my farm. The irony was, they actually grew the crops well enough because of the soil I had nourished for decades. And the closer harvest season came, the more they bragged about how productive the garden was. They posted drone footage. They invited local news. And the entire time, I watched, silent, preparing the next step of my plan. When the crops ripened, thick red tomatoes, golden corn, herbs rich enough to flavor a kingdom, I called a produce wholesaler, not a roadside buyer. I invited a professional harvesting crew. Before sunrise, engines started, lights flashed, and the HOA's garden became a fully operational commercial harvest zone. When Linda arrived screaming, it was too late. My crew had receipts, weight records, and evaluation report. Before I left, I posted a sign exactly where hers had stood weeks ago. Harvest complete. Invoice incoming. When the HOA board received the invoice, the neighborhood group chat exploded like a storm in a glass house. The bill was not small, not symbolic, not a scare tactic. It was precise and based on agricultural commodity rates. $82,463.17 due upon receipt. Linda called me before I even finished my morning tea. Her voice shook as she said, "This is absurd. You can't charge us for crops grown on HOA land." Except it wasn't their land. I emailed her, attaching the deed, again, and a legal memorandum detailing trespassing, crop conversion, and commercial produce valuation violation. If they wanted to see me in court, I was ready. But deep down, we both knew they didn't want that. Neighbors who had once cheered for the community garden were suddenly quiet. Some apologized privately. Others avoided me completely. But the most interesting thing happened. More than a dozen homeowners filed complaints, not against me, but against the HOA. They said they were misled, that their volunteer labor was used under false legal claims, that the HOA president abused authority. And the harvest? It sold faster than I expected. Restaurants wanted my tomatoes. Bakeries wanted my pumpkin harvest. The soil had always been generous. The world outside the HOA appreciated it more than those who stole it. I didn't ask for sympathy. I didn't want revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted acknowledgement, respect, for the land that raised me. And then, another interesting development arrived, a letter from the State Agricultural Commission. They requested a formal statement regarding unauthorized municipal seizure of privately cultivated land. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. It was legal history in the making. That evening, I walked my land again. For the first time in weeks, it felt mine, quiet, breathing, patient. The oak tree leaves rustled like they approved. And somewhere deep inside, I realized something: this wasn't just a harvest of crops. It was a harvest of truth. The emergency HOA meeting drew the biggest crowd the neighborhood had seen. People brought lawn chairs, coffee, popcorn, like they were attending a show. In a way, they were. I sat in the front row, deed folder on my lap, not saying a word. The board members looked like they hadn't slept in days, especially Linda. She shuffled papers, trying to find a narrative that would save her. When she tried to open with a speech, someone from the crowd shouted, "You took land that wasn't yours." Another voice followed. "We trusted you. Now we're all paying for it." And suddenly, the board wasn't in control anymore. The homeowners were. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I opened the deed and simply said, "My family has farmed this land for 74 years. You called it abandoned. But it fed this community long before an HOA ever existed." I showed them the video of Linda saying the land was theirs. The crowd gasped. Phones recorded everything. When the board voted on whether to fight me in court or settle, the result was unanimous. They would pay the bill. And Linda would resign. The morning after the resignation, I stepped onto my fields with a sense of quiet relief. The air smelled of earth and dew, and the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze felt like a welcome home. But this time, I wasn't alone. Neighbors I had only ever waved to across fences now walked beside me, not as intruders, not as skeptics, but as curious guests. Some carried notebooks, asking questions about planting cycles and soil care. Others brought baskets of homegrown vegetables, hoping to learn the rhythm of the land rather than claim it. They wanted to know how to grow food the right way, how to nurture crops without exploiting the soil, and how to respect the life that sprang from it. Children ran laughing between the rows of towering sunflowers, their small hands brushing against golden petals as they darted through the field. The sound of their joy was pure, a contrast to the tension that had gripped these lands for so long. A woman arrived with fresh bread, the aroma mingling with the crisp morning air, while another neighbor presented jars of honey, the golden liquid shimmering like sunlight captured in glass. Slowly, the farmland transformed before my eyes, from battleground to sanctuary, from contested territory to community gathering place. It was no longer a plot marked by HOA signs and legal disputes. It was alive again, pulsing with purpose, memory, and shared respect. Weeks later, the payment arrived, every last cent of the $82,463.17. I remember staring at the check, feeling the weight of what it represented, not vengeance, not greed, but justice. A portion of that money went into repairing the scars left by the HOA's intrusion. Broken fences were rebuilt, damaged irrigation lines replaced, and the soil that had been disturbed was restored with care. But the rest? That went into something larger than myself, a local food initiative designed to give back to the community that truly valued the land. It allowed neighbors and children alike to cultivate plots of their own, to learn responsibility, patience, and reverence for the earth. The initiative became a living legacy, ensuring that this soil would continue to feed those who understood its worth. And one evening, I sat on my porch, cup of tea in hand, the horizon ablaze with orange and lavender streaks that reflected the slow fading of day into night. The fields shimmered under the soft twilight, the sunflowers swaying gently as if acknowledging their caretaker. I thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the confrontation, the victory, and the quiet satisfaction that came after. And I realized something deeper than mere triumph: the HOA never truly seized my land. They had possession for a fleeting moment, but they had never touched its heart. Because this land wasn't just soil and seeds. It was memory, it was labor, it was sweat, history, and love. Every furrowed row, every golden stalk, every patch of thriving greenery bore witness to the generations who had nurtured it. It knew my name. And it never stopped being mine. As the night settled and the stars began to glimmer faintly above, I whispered to the land, almost as if it could hear me, "They harvested my patience, but I harvested the truth." And that is something no one can ever take away. For the first time in months, I felt a profound sense of peace. My land was alive again, and so was the spirit of community, growing stronger with each passing day.